Mike Sorensen was up on a ladder patching the flashing above my workshop door when he said the sentence that split my life into a before and an after. "Shame about the sale," he said, not even looking down at me. "New owners already talking about tearing out the west wall." I told him he had the wrong building. He climbed down slow, wiped his hands on his jeans, and looked at me like a man who suddenly understood he'd said something he shouldn't have. "Mr. Higgins," he said, "your son closed on this place 3 weeks ago. I did the pre-sale inspection myself. I stood there in the gravel lot of the shop I built with my own 2 hands 35 years ago, and I felt the ground tilt just slightly under my boots. I'm grateful you're here with me for this one. If you're new, welcome, and if you've been with me a while, thank you for coming back. Drop the name of your city or your country in the comments before we go any further. I read every single one, and it means more than you know to see where this reaches. I also want to say plainly, the way I always do, that this story blends real patterns of elder financial abuse with details shaped for the sake of telling it well. Names, places, some of the specifics, they are constructed. But the lesson underneath them is not. Stay with me. This one gets complicated before it gets better. My name is Walter Higgins. I'm 68 years old, and for 35 of those years I ran a custom woodworking shop on the edge of Millhaven with a man named Raymond Doyle, my best friend since we were 19 years old, sanding cabinet doors for somebody else's furniture business and swearing we'd have our own place someday. We called it Higgins and Doyle Custom Woodworks, and we built dining tables and church pews and gun cabinets and rocking chairs for 3 counties, and for a long stretch of years it was the only thing in my life besides my wife Margaret and my son Ethan that I was truly, uncomplicatedly proud of. Margaret passed 2 years and 4 months ago. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in March, gone by August, fast the way the doctor said it sometimes goes, though nothing about 8 weeks of watching your wife of 39 years disappear a little more every morning ever felt fast to me. I wasn't counting the days since she died. I want to be clear about that. I just knew the number the way you know your own birthday, without trying. Raymond sold me his half of the shop when he retired to Sarasota 9 years back, his knees finally telling him what 40 years of standing on concrete floors does to a man, but he kept his name on the sign because I asked him to, and because neither of us could imagine it any other way. I kept running the place with 2 part-time guys and my son Ethan handling what he called the business side, invoicing, the website, talking to suppliers, ever since he moved back to Millhaven from Columbus about 3 years ago, right around the time things got hard for him and his wife, Priya, financially. He'd lost a management job at a logistics company. Priya was still working, teaching high school biology, steady but not enough on its own with the mortgage they had. I told Ethan, come work with your old man, learn the business, it'll be here for you someday anyway. He'd said yes so fast it had warmed something in my chest that had been cold since Margaret died. That was the last uncomplicated thing that happened between my son and me. I didn't know it yet, standing in that gravel lot with Mike Sorensen's ladder still leaned against the wall, but it was true all the same. I called Ethan from my truck before I'd even pulled out of the lot. He picked up on the 4th ring, and I could hear a restaurant behind him, silverware, low conversation. "Dad, hey, what's up?" "Mike Sorensen just told me the shop's been sold," I said. I kept my voice level. 40-some years of running a business had taught me that much, at least. You don't lead with the accusation, you lead with the fact and you watch how the other man's face moves around it. There was a pause on the line. Just long enough. "Dad, I can explain, but not over the phone." "Can I come by tonight?" "You can come by right now," I said. "I'm at lunch with a client, Dad. I'll come by at 6. I promise, it's not what it sounds like." I sat in my truck in that gravel lot for a long time after he hung up, looking at the sign that still read Higgins Doyle in letters Raymond and I had routed out of Solid Oak the same week Ethan was born, 39 years ago this coming spring, and I thought about how a man can build something with his hands for 35 years and lose it in the time it takes his son to order lunch. Before I go any further, I want you to sit with me on this one. If a story like this has ever brushed close to your own life, maybe not this exact shape of it, but the shape of somebody you trusted handling something that wasn't theirs to handle, type the word listening in the comments. I want to know I'm not just talking into the dark. Ethan came by at 6:15, 20 minutes late, which for a man who'd just agreed to explain why he'd sold his father's business without telling him felt like its own kind of message. He sat down across from me at my kitchen table, the same table Margaret and I had eaten 10,000 breakfasts at, and he folded his hands the way he used to when he was 12 and had done something he knew was going to disappoint me. "Dad, listen. The shop's been losing money for 2 years. You know that. Lumber costs are up 40%. We haven't landed a big commercial contract since before Mom got sick. I've been carrying it on the business line of credit and it's not sustainable." "That's not an answer to what I asked you," I said. "I asked you why there's a for sale sign that came down without my name ever going on a listing." He looked at the table. "There's a company, Cornerstone Legacy Partners. They specialize in helping family businesses transition when the owner is aging out and there's no clear succession path. Victor Marsh runs it. He's been advising me for about 4 months. He said with lumber costs where they are, and with you not really wanting to be hands-on anymore since Mom," he stopped himself. I watched him decide not to finish that sentence, and I watched myself decide not to make him. "Since your mom what, Ethan?" "Since Mom died, Dad. You haven't been the same in the shop. You know you haven't. You've been distracted." Victor said the smart move, financially, was to sell the property to a developer who wants to convert it to flex office space, and use the proceeds to pay off the line of credit and set you up with something stable instead of bleeding money every month on a business that isn't what it used to be. I sat very still. "And whose name did you put on the sale documents, son?" He didn't answer right away. Outside, a dog barked somewhere down the street, ordinary and far away. "Yours," he said finally. "Under the power of attorney. From after Mom's diagnosis. You remember, we did it so I could help handle things if you got overwhelmed with the hospital stuff." I did remember. I remembered signing it in a lawyer's office 18 months before Margaret died, a general document, meant for exactly the kind of season we were in then, appointments, insurance calls, things a grieving, exhausted man might drop. I remembered thinking of it, if I thought of it at all, as something that would sit in a drawer unused, the way you buy a fire extinguisher and hope to never need it. "Ethan," I said, and my voice came out quieter than I expected it to. "Did I sign anything for this sale?" Victor said the POA covers it. You don't need a separate signature. That's the whole point of the document, Dad. That is not the whole point of the document, I said. That document was for medical decisions and paying bills when I couldn't get to the bank. It was never for selling the business your grandfather's tools built. Ethan's jaw tightened, and for just a second I saw something in his face that I didn't recognize, not my son, exactly, but somebody wearing an expression I'd only ever seen on men across a negotiating table. Dad, the deal's already closed. $210,000 minus what's owed on the line of credit. It's done. I did it to help you. I didn't want you to watch the business die slowly the way you watched Mom. Don't, I said, and this time my voice wasn't quiet at all. He left a little after 7. He hugged me at the door the way he always did, and he said he loved me, and I said it back because that's what you do, and then I stood in my own front hallway with the porch light off and I thought about a man named Victor Marsh whose name I had never heard before that evening, who had apparently spent for months advising my son on what to do with 35 years of my life. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in front of me, and somewhere close to midnight, I did the only thing that felt like it might actually help. I picked up my phone and called Raymond Doyle. Ray answered on the second ring, which for a 71-year-old man in Florida at nearly midnight told me he wasn't sleeping well either, some nights, same as me. "Walt," he said, "it's been a while. Everything all right?" "No," I said. "It isn't. I need to tell you something, and I need you to tell me I'm not losing my mind." I told him everything. Mike Sorensen on the ladder. The phone call to Ethan. The dinner at the kitchen table. Cornerstone Legacy Partners. Victor Marsh. The power of attorney used for something it was never written to cover. Ray listened without interrupting, the way he always had, back when we used to sit up late arguing about whether to take a commission that would stretch us too thin, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Walt," he said finally, "that shop has my name on the sign. Half the equipment in there, some of it still technically mine on paper, from the transfer we never fully refiled after I sold you my share, because we're a couple of old fools who trusted a handshake over paperwork. Whatever your son did, he may have sold something that wasn't entirely his to sell either." I felt something shift in my chest, some small mechanism of hope clicking into place. "You think we have a case?" "I think," Ray said, "that before either of us thinks anything, you need a lawyer, and you need one tomorrow morning, not next week. And Walt, don't sign another single piece of paper Ethan or this Victor Marsh puts in front of you. Not for anything. Not a birthday card. If you've ever had to call an old friend at midnight because your own family had become a stranger to you, take a second and just breathe with me for a moment." That phone call to Raymond Doyle was the first thing in nearly a week that had felt like solid ground. Keep that feeling in mind. It's going to matter later. The next morning, I drove into town to see a lawyer named Nora Bishop, whose office sat above the old feed store on Grant Street, a building that had been there longer than I had. Nora was maybe 55, gray threaded through dark hair she kept pulled back simple, and she had the particular quality of someone who had spent decades listening to people at the worst moments of their financial lives and had learned not to flinch at any of it. I laid out everything on her desk. The story, as I understood it so far. She listened, took notes in handwriting so small and neat it looked typed, and when I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Higgins, a general durable power of attorney executed for medical and routine financial matters does not automatically authorize the sale of real property or a business entity unless the document specifically enumerates that authority. I'd need to see the exact document you signed, but from what you're describing, your son may have significantly overstepped its scope. That alone could be grounds to void the transaction." "Could be," I repeated. "Could be," she agreed. "It depends on the language, and it depends on what Cornerstone Legacy Partners actually did with the paperwork on their end. I want to be honest with you. Sometimes these operations are sloppy and easy to unwind. And sometimes they're not sloppy at all, they're built by people who understand exactly how far a power of attorney can be stretched before it snaps, and they stop just short of that line every time. I need you to get me a copy of the sale agreement, the POA document, and anything else Ethan will give you. And Mr. Higgins, I'd encourage you to look a little closer at this Victor Marsh before you decide this is only about your son." I left her office with a knot in my stomach that hadn't been there when I walked in, because some part of me had wanted her to say this was a mistake, an overreach, a misunderstanding between a grieving father and a well-meaning if clumsy son. She hadn't said that. She'd said the name Victor Marsh like a woman circling something on a map. That afternoon I drove out to the shop, now apparently belonging to somebody else, and stood in the gravel lot again, looking at the building. The lock on the side door was still the old one, the one I'd had since 1998. I still had a key. I told myself it wasn't trespassing if I still owned half the tools inside, whatever the paperwork said. I let myself in. My office in the back corner of the shop was exactly as I'd left it, and that told me something. Whoever this developer was, they hadn't moved fast enough yet to clear it out. My old desktop computer sat where it always did, dusty, slow, the machine Ethan had told me a dozen times to replace, and I never had, because I liked the way it hummed the same way it had for 15 years. I sat down and turned it on, and while it groaned through its startup, I opened the bottom drawer where I kept old invoices, and instead of invoices, near the back, I found a manila folder I didn't recognize. Inside was a sale agreement. $210,000, buyer listed as a company called Meridian Flex Properties LLC. My name on the signature line, in handwriting that was close to mine, closer than I would have expected from a forgery, but not mine. I know my own signature the way I know the sound of my own front door. This wasn't it. The W leaned the wrong direction. My W has always leaned back, ever since a nun taught me cursive in 3rd grade and told me I was doing it backward, and I never fixed it because Margaret said she liked it that way. Beneath the sale agreement was a letter on Cornerstone Legacy Partners letterhead, addressed to Ethan, dated for months earlier. I read it twice standing in that dusty office with the old computer humming behind me. Ethan, per our conversation, the smoothest path forward given your father's diminished capacity for day-to-day oversight since his wife's passing is to proceed under the existing POA rather than seek a new signature, which could create unnecessary complications or delay if he becomes resistant. I've handled situations like this before. Once the sale closes and the funds are restructured, we can discuss next steps for the retirement account and the life insurance policy. Keep this between us for now. VM. I sat down hard in my old office chair. Diminished capacity. I was 68 years old, I drove myself everywhere, I balanced my own checkbook, I had never once been told by a single doctor that my mind was anything other than sound, tired sometimes with grief, but sound. And this man, this Victor Marsh, had written those 2 words about me in a letter to my own son as though they were an established fact rather than a convenient lie. Next steps for the retirement account and the life insurance policy. I photographed every page of that folder with my phone, put it back exactly as I'd found it, and drove straight to Nora Bishop's office without calling ahead. She read the letter twice, the same way I had, and I watched her expression go from careful professional neutrality to something harder. "Mr. Higgins," she said, "this is not a well-meaning son making a mistake. This is a pattern. Diminished capacity language used deliberately to justify bypassing your consent, that's not an accident of wording. That's a phrase somebody uses when they're building a paper trail to protect themselves if this ever gets challenged. I want to bring in someone else. A private investigator I've worked with before. His name is Sam Ostrowski. He's thorough, and he's discreet, and frankly, Mr. Higgins, I think we need to know who Victor Marsh really is before we do anything else. If you're still with me, drop the word "still" in the comments. This is the part where the story stops being about a family misunderstanding and starts being about something a great deal colder. And a quick note before we keep going, some details ahead are shaped for the telling, the way any story like this is. But the mechanics of what happens next, the way this kind of fraud actually works, that part is true to how it happens in real life, more often than most people want to believe. Sam Ostrowski met me 2 days later in a booth at a diner off Route 9, a heavy-set man in his early 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the unhurried manner of someone who had spent a long career learning that most people eventually tell you everything if you just let the silence sit long enough. He'd already spent a day digging before we even sat down. "Victor Marsh," he said, sliding a folder across the table, is not his real name. Or rather, it is a real name, but it isn't the one he was born with. Public records under Victor Marsh only go back 6 years, all in this state. Before that, nothing. No property, no marriage license, no old addresses that check out under standard database searches. That's not how real people's records look, Mr. Higgins. That's how a person's records look when they've built a new identity on purpose. Cornerstone Legacy Partners, I said. Registered as an LLC 18 months ago. Registered agent is a P.O. box in a UPS store 2 towns over. No physical office that I could find, though your son clearly believes he's dealt with a real business, probably over video calls and phone. I ran the name Victor Marsh against a couple of consumer fraud databases and got a partial hit. A man matching his general description was investigated 3 years ago in another state under the name Gregory Vance, in connection with an elderly widower whose farm got sold out from under him through almost this exact same mechanism. Power of attorney, claims of diminished capacity, a shell company buyer. Charges were never filed. The widower died of a heart attack before the case went anywhere, and without a living victim willing to testify, the DA's office let it go. I felt something cold settle into my chest, the same feeling I imagine a man gets when he realizes the storm he's watching on the horizon has already changed direction toward his own house. He's done this before. I believe he has, Sam said. And I believe your son doesn't know that. From what I'm seeing so far, your son looks like a man who trusted a financial advisor at a moment when he was scared about the business failing and scared about you being alone since your wife passed. That doesn't make what he did to you all right. But it's a different thing than what Victor Marsh is doing. Nora Bishop, sitting beside me in the booth, tapped the folder. Mr. Higgins, I want to be straightforward with you. If Victor Marsh has done this before, and if he's connected to a network of people who help move stolen assets, forge documents, shell buyers, maybe a compliant professional or two who look the other way for a fee, this is bigger than unwinding one bad sale. We may be looking at organized elder financial exploitation. That's a different conversation with law enforcement than a family dispute over a power of attorney. I thought about my son sitting across the kitchen table from me 2 nights before, folding his hands the way he used to at 12 years old. I thought about how badly I wanted this to be a mistake he'd made out of fear and grief, rather than something colder. What do we do? I said. First, Nora said, we find out exactly what else Victor Marsh has already put in motion. That letter mentioned your retirement account and your life insurance policy as next steps. We need to know if anything's already been touched. The next morning I called my financial advisor, a woman named Teresa Alvarez who had managed my modest retirement savings for 11 years, ever since I finally let Margaret talk me into consolidating 3 old accounts into something manageable. She pulled up my file while I sat in my truck in the driveway, and I could hear her go quiet in a way I didn't like. Mr. Higgins, she said, there's a request in our system, submitted 8 days ago, to change the beneficiary designation on your account from your estate to a new individual, a Priya Higgins, and a separate request to initiate a partial withdrawal of $40,000 for what's listed as a medical hardship. Both requests came in with your electronic signature and a notarized authorization letter. I hadn't processed either yet because our compliance department flags any beneficiary change over a certain threshold for a mandatory callback verification, and I hadn't gotten to you yet this week. Mr. Higgins, did you authorize either of these? I sat in my driveway with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. No, I said. I did not. Then I'm freezing both requests right now, and I need you to come in and sign a written revocation, today if you can. Priya. My daughter-in-law. a woman I had hugged at Thanksgiving 4 weeks earlier, who had brought Margaret soup twice a week during the worst of the chemotherapy, who taught high school biology to teenagers who by every account adored her. I did not want to believe her name belonged on that document. But there it was, in Teresa Alvarez's file, plain as anything. Nora Bishop, when I called her from the parking lot outside Teresa's office, was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Higgins, I want you to consider something, and I want you to sit with it before you react. It's possible your daughter-in-law knew exactly what this was. It's also possible she's exactly where your son was 4 months ago, trusting an advisor who told her this was the smart, legal way to help an aging father-in-law who was, in Victor Marsh's words, of diminished capacity. We don't know yet. Don't confront anyone. Not Ethan. Not Priya. Not Victor Marsh. Let Sam keep digging. The moment any of them know you're aware, everything they haven't finished yet, they'll rush to finish, or they'll disappear. If you've made it this far, I want to check in with you the way I wish somebody had checked in with me during that week. This is heavy. If any part of this story is landing close to something in your own life right now, I want you to know that's allowed to be true, and it doesn't make you foolish, and it doesn't make you weak. Keep that in your pocket. We're going to come back to it at the end. For the next several days, I did the hardest thing I have ever done in my life, harder in its own way than sitting beside Margaret's hospital bed, because at least there I never had to pretend. I acted normal. Ethan came by twice that week, bringing takeout, talking about the shop's transition, calling it a fresh start for me, financial breathing room. I nodded. I asked about his job. I let him hug me at the door and I hugged him back and I told him I loved him, and every single time some part of me wondered if I would ever be able to say those words to him again and mean them the uncomplicated way I used to. Sam Ostrowski called on the 5th day. I found something you need to see in person, he said. Can you meet me at Nora's office tomorrow morning? He laid out photographs across Nora's conference table the next day, surveillance shots he'd taken over 3 days, parked outside a nondescript office park 2 towns over. This building, he said, tapping a photograph of a beige 2-story structure with a sign reading Green Line Business Suites, is where Victor Marsh actually operates from, despite the P.O. box on his registration. Suite 214. I watched him go in and out 4 times this week. And on Tuesday, he had a visitor. He slid another photograph across the table. A woman, mid-30s, dark hair, professional dress, walking into the building carrying a leather portfolio. Priya Higgins, Nora said quietly, reading the look on my face before I said anything. That's your daughter-in-law, correct? Sam asked. I nodded. My mouth had gone dry. She was inside for 51 minutes, Sam said. I don't have audio from inside the building, obviously, but I did get something else. He pulled out his laptop and turned the screen toward me. This is a public records filing from the county recorder's office, filed 2 days ago. It's a UCC financing statement, basically a lien filing, against equipment listed as belonging to Higgins and Doyle Custom Woodworks, LLC, using your business as collateral for a loan of $95,000 to a development entity connected to Victor Marsh's network. The lien was authorized using a signature purporting to be yours, notarized by a woman named Denise Calloway, whose notary commission, it turns out, was suspended by the Secretary of State's office 14 months ago for improper notarizations connected to 2 prior real estate fraud cases in this county. I sat back in my chair. He's using my equipment as collateral for his own loan. That appears to be exactly what's happening, Sam said. And Mr. Higgins, I want to be honest with you about the scale of this. Victor Marsh, or Gregory Vance, whatever his real name turns out to be, doesn't seem to be operating alone. Denise Calloway, the notary, I found her connected to 3 other suspicious filings in the past 2 years, all involving elderly property owners. This looks like a small, organized operation. Marsh finds the target, usually through a family member who's financially stressed and susceptible to being convinced this is all in the parent's best interest. Callaway provides fraudulent notarization. And there appears to be at least one more person involved. I found a name repeated across 2 of Marsh's shell companies as a registered agent. A man named Douglas Reyes, who according to his own LinkedIn profile identifies himself as a certified elder care financial consultant. No such certification exists, as far as I can find, from any recognized body. Nora folded her hands on the table. Mr. Higgins, I think it's time we brought in the police. Specifically, I'd recommend Detective Carla Reyes with the Millhaven Financial Crimes Unit. No relation to Douglas Reyes, as far as I know, just an unfortunate coincidence of names. I've worked with her on 2 prior elder exploitation cases. She's thorough, and she moves fast when the evidence is solid, which yours is becoming. I want to pause here and ask you something, because I asked myself the same question that week, sitting in my empty house with Margaret's reading glasses still on the nightstand where she'd left them. If you found out someone in your own family had been part of something like this, even without full knowledge of how far it went, would you be able to forgive that, eventually? Or is there a line that, once crossed, just can't be walked back? I'm not asking rhetorically. I genuinely want to know what you think, because I've turned it over in my mind more times than I can count, and I still don't have an answer I'm fully at peace with. Leave it in the comments if you're willing. I read them all, even the hard ones. Detective Carla Reyes met me the following Monday in a small conference room at the Millhaven Police Department, a compact woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the kind of stillness that comes from having heard a great many difficult things without flinching. She listened to the whole account, reviewed Sam's file, reviewed the letter with the phrase diminished capacity in it, and set it down with her jaw tight. Mr. Higgins, she said, what you're describing has the shape of something we've been building a quieter file on for about a year, without a name to attach to the pattern until now. 3 other elderly property owners in this county, over the past 2 years, have had assets moved through power of attorney overreach with the involvement of a suspended notary and shell buyer entities. None of the previous victims were willing or able to pursue charges. 1 had already passed away, 1 had genuine cognitive decline that made testimony difficult, and 1, frankly, was too ashamed to come forward. You are, as far as I can tell, the first victim we've found who caught this in progress, with a clear mind, real evidence, and the will to see it through. That matters enormously. What do you need from me? I said. I need you to keep behaving exactly as you have been around your son and daughter-in-law. I need you not to confront Victor Marsh directly. And I'd like your permission to install recording equipment, both audio and video, in locations where you believe conversations relevant to this fraud are likely to happen, your home, and if you're willing, back inside that shop office, since your key still works and the equipment there is technically part of what's been fraudulently used as collateral. Anything recorded on your own property, with your consent as the owner, is fully admissible under state law. This is the fastest, cleanest way to build a case that doesn't rely solely on witnesses who might get scared off or lawyer up before trial. I thought of Sylvia's line I'd read once in somebody else's story, though I didn't know it yet, a woman who told her husband to fight, not for the house, not for the money, but because he was the kind of man who didn't let people take things from him without a fight. I didn't have Margaret's voice to remind me of that in a letter, the way some men are lucky enough to have. But I had 35 years of building something with my hands, and I had Raymond Doyle on the phone from Sarasota telling me the same thing in his own blunt way. Walt, you didn't spend your whole life making things to let some con man with a fake name take it apart in 6 months. Do it, I told Detective Reyes. Install whatever you need to. A technician named Danny Cho came out 2 days later, a quiet, efficient young man who did the whole job in under 2 hours, a small camera built into a smoke detector in my living room, one hidden in a wall clock in my kitchen, and with the detective's coordination, a third device installed in the shop office where my old desktop still hummed away, disguised inside an old radio I'd kept on the shelf since the Reagan administration. Danny showed me how to check the footage from an app on my phone, confirmed the audio pickup was clear across each room, and left without much fanfare. For the next 9 days, I watched. I fast-forwarded through hours of empty rooms and ordinary footage of myself moving through my own kitchen making coffee, and I began to understand something about the particular loneliness of watching your own life on a screen, waiting for the moment it would turn into evidence. It came on the 11th evening. Ethan and Priya came for dinner, something they'd started doing twice a week since the sale, I think out of guilt they hadn't fully named to themselves, though I understood that better after everything else came out. I cooked. We ate at the kitchen table. The conversation was ordinary, painfully so. Priya asked about a rocking chair I'd made for a customer years ago that she'd always admired. Ethan talked about a new job lead he was chasing. After dinner, I excused myself early, told them I was tired, went up to bed, and left them at the table clearing dishes, the way they often did before letting themselves out. I lay in the dark upstairs with my phone on my chest, the app open, watching the kitchen camera feed. What I heard over the next 11 minutes I have replayed more times than I can count, and I still feel my stomach drop every time. Priya's voice first, low. Victor called again today. He says the $95,000 from the equipment lien clears next week, once the notary refile goes through. He wants to know when we're doing the retirement account withdrawal. Ethan's voice, quieter than I'd ever heard it. I don't know if I want to do the retirement piece, Pry. The shop sale, I told myself that was different, the business was actually losing money, I told myself I was helping Dad avoid a worse outcome down the road. But pulling money out of his retirement account under a hardship claim, when there's no actual hardship. Ethan, we owe Victor's people for the introduction fee already. If we back out now, after the shop sale already went through with his help, he's not going to just let that go quietly. He as much as told me that. A long pause. Then Ethan again. What do you mean, let it go quietly? What is that supposed to mean? I mean, I don't fully know what kind of people he works with, and I don't want to find out by testing it, Priya said, and there was something in her voice that didn't sound like a woman running a con. It sounded like a woman who had gotten in over her head and was only now understanding the water was deeper than she'd been told. Pry, we need to stop. Look at Dad tonight. He seems fine. He's not diminished, he's not confused, he's grieving Mom, same as he'll probably be grieving her in some way for the rest of his life, but that's not the same thing as what Victor's letter said. I read that letter again last night. Diminished capacity. That's not true, Pry. We both know it's not true. I think we did something we can't undo, and I think we need to talk to a lawyer, our own lawyer, not Victor's people, before this goes any further. There was a long silence after that. Then I heard Priya's chair scrape back from the table. I need to think, she said. Just give me a few days before you do anything, Ethan. Please. The footage ended there. I lay in the dark for a long time after, my chest tight in a way I didn't fully have words for. My son had done something terrible, and my son was also, apparently, in that same recorded moment, the first person in this entire tangled mess to say the words diminished capacity is not true out loud. I didn't know yet what to do with both of those facts sitting side by side in the same 11 minutes of audio. I still don't know, fully, even now, looking back on it. I called Detective Reyes first thing in the morning and played her the recording. She listened twice, the way Nora Bishop had listened to the letter, and when it finished she was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Higgins," she said, "this is useful in ways I don't think you fully appreciate yet. It establishes that your son and daughter-in-law were operating under false representations from Victor Marsh, that he told them a story about your capacity that they're now, on tape, admitting they don't believe. That doesn't erase what they did. But it changes how a prosecutor is likely to charge them versus how they'll charge Marsh, Calloway, and Reyes. I want to move quickly now, before Priya has time to think herself into either confessing to Marsh or disappearing on us. Are you willing to help us set up one more conversation, in person, that we can record properly and use to bring this to a head?" "What do you need me to do?" I said. "I want you to call Ethan. Tell him you want to talk, just the two of you, about the shop, about moving forward. Something calm, not accusatory. Get him to your house. We'll have Sam and one of my officers nearby. If he tells you what we just heard on that recording, in person, with you as a direct witness alongside the recording equipment already in your home, that's the beginning of unwinding this the right way, through your son coming forward, not through us kicking down a door." I called Ethan that evening. My voice shook more than I wanted it to, and I let it, because a man is allowed a tremor in his voice when he's about to have the hardest conversation of his life with his own child. "Son," I said, "I think it's time we talked. Just us. Tomorrow, if you're free." He came the next afternoon, and he looked like a man who hadn't slept much either. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table, the smoke detector camera silently doing its work above us, and I said the truest thing I had to say. "Ethan, I know about the shop. I know about the retirement account request. I know about the lien on the equipment. I need to hear from you, right now, exactly how much you understand about what's actually happening here." He put his head in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were wet in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. "Dad, I think we got taken. I think Victor Marsh isn't who he said he was. I read that letter again, the one where he called you diminished, and it isn't true, Dad, and I knew it wasn't true even when I let myself believe it because I was scared about the business and scared about you being alone and I wanted somebody to tell me there was an easy answer." "There isn't one," I said quietly. "There never was." "I know that now," he said. "Dad, I haven't done the retirement withdrawal. I told Priya yesterday I wasn't going to. I've been trying to figure out how to even bring this to you without you never speaking to me again. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't simple, and I don't think grief or betrayal ever really are. I felt relief, and I felt fury, both at once, sitting right next to each other in my chest like two men who don't like each other forced to share a booth. "Ethan," I said, "you're going to need to tell all of this to a detective. Today. And you're going to need a lawyer of your own, because what you've admitted to me, some of it, is a crime, whatever Victor Marsh told you to believe about it." He nodded, and he cried in a way I hadn't seen since Margaret's funeral, and I sat across from my son at that kitchen table and I let him. "If you're still here, I want you to comment the word truth, because that's what this next part of the story is really about, not revenge, not punishment for its own sake, but the slow, uncomfortable work of getting to the truth even when it comes at a cost you didn't want to pay." And one more gentle note before we go further, some of what's ahead involves conversations that have been reconstructed for the sake of the telling. The events themselves happened. The exact words are, in places, my best memory of them, or a reasonable approximation built for clarity. Ethan gave his statement to Detective Reyes that same afternoon, with his own attorney present, a young man named Felix Adeyemi that Nora Bishop had recommended, who specialized in exactly this kind of situation, a person who had done something wrong under manipulation and needed to come forward before it got worse. Ethan's cooperation, it turned out, was the thread that unraveled the rest of it faster than anyone expected. Priya came forward 2 days later, on her own, walking into the Millhaven Police Department with Felix Adeyemi's recommendation for her own separate counsel and a folder of emails between herself and Victor Marsh that went back 5 months, emails that laid out, in Marsh's own words, a plan considerably larger than what Ethan had known about. Detective Reyes called me that evening. "Mr. Higgins, I need you to come in tomorrow morning. There's something in these emails you need to see." Nora Bishop sat beside me the next day as Detective Reyes slid a printed email across the table, dated 7 weeks earlier, from Victor Marsh to Priya alone, with Ethan not copied. "Priya, I understand your husband is getting cold feet, which happens more often than you'd think in these situations. Adult children love their parents and it clouds their judgment about what's truly best. I want to remind you that we discussed a longer-term restructuring here, not just the shop. Once the retirement account transfer is complete and the life insurance beneficiary change goes through, we can discuss the house itself. A property that size, paid off, in this market, represents real value that's currently sitting idle with a single elderly occupant. I've handled transitions like this smoothly before when the family understands the full picture and doesn't lose their nerve halfway through. Keep Ethan calm and don't let him talk to his father directly about the diminished capacity language. That's simply the legal mechanism, not something to feel guilty about. I read it twice. My own house. Margaret's rose bushes along the walk, the room we'd raised Ethan in, the kitchen table we were sitting at when he confessed to me, all of it, apparently, the next line item on a spreadsheet somewhere in Victor Marsh's operation. "Mr. Higgins," Detective Reyes said, "Priya has agreed to cooperate fully and to wear a recording device in one final meeting with Marsh, which we believe will give us what we need to charge him, Denise Calloway, and Douglas Reyes with conspiracy, forgery, and financial exploitation of an elderly person. On top of everything Sam Ostrowski has already uncovered connecting Marsh to at least 3 prior victims under his previous identity. I want to be honest with you about the risk. This kind of operation isn't without danger. But we believe, with proper surveillance and a tactical team nearby, we can do this safely." I thought about Margaret's rose bushes. I thought about a man whose real name I still didn't fully know, sitting in a beige office building 2 towns over, writing the words "a property that size, paid off, currently sitting idle with a single elderly occupant, about my own home, about the rest of my life reduced to an asset waiting to be moved." "Do it," I said. "Whatever you need." The meeting happened 6 days later, at a coffee shop chosen by Marsh himself, a place 2 exits down the interstate where he apparently felt comfortable, unaware that Priya had been wearing a recording device sewn into the lining of her jacket, unaware that Sam Ostrowski was parked across the street with a long lens, unaware that Detective Reyes and 2 plainclothes officers were seated for tables away pretending to read newspapers. I wasn't in the room, of course. I sat in Nora Bishop's office 2 hours later listening to the recording with her and Detective Reyes, and I heard, for the first time, the actual voice of the man who had spent for months disassembling my life. It was smooth, unhurried, almost gentle, the voice of a man who had clearly done this so many times he no longer needed to raise it to make people believe him. "Priya, I understand the hesitation, truly. But we're so close now. The house alone, once we've established the pattern of diminished capacity through the medical consultant I mentioned, represents nearly $400,000 in equity that could be restructured to protect the family's long-term interests rather than sitting with a grieving widower who, forgive me for saying so plainly, isn't going to be around to enjoy it as long as either of us would like to think." "The medical consultant," Priya said, her voice steady in a way that must have taken everything she had. "You mean Dr. Foster?" "Neil's been very helpful with prior clients," Marsh said. "A short evaluation, some carefully worded documentation about early cognitive changes consistent with grief and age, and suddenly the family has a legitimate paper trail supporting the decisions you've already made on his behalf. It protects everyone. It's not deception," Priya. It's foresight. I sat in Nora's office and felt something in me go very cold and very still. A doctor. There was a doctor in this, willing to falsify a diagnosis for money, willing to put his name on paper suggesting I was losing my mind when I had never once been anything but clear-eyed and awake to my own grief. Neil Foster, Detective Reyes said, once the recording finished. That name matches a physician currently under a pending state medical board complaint, filed 8 months ago by the family of another elderly patient in a neighboring county, alleging he provided a fraudulent capacity evaluation in exchange for payment from a third party. The complaint stalled for lack of a second corroborating case. Mr. Higgins, we may just have become that second case. If you've stayed with me through all of this, I want to tell you something plainly, the way I wish someone had told me during that awful stretch of weeks. What you're hearing is not rare. It is not some strange, isolated criminal genius operating alone. It is a network, a lawyer here, a notary there, a doctor willing to look the other way for a fee, all of them small, ordinary-seeming people who found it easier to profit off a grieving old man than to imagine what it might feel like to be him. If this is stirring something uncomfortable in you, something close to home, I want you to know that reaching out for help, the way I finally did with Raymond and Nora and Sam, is not weakness. It is very often the only thing that works. 3 weeks later, Detective Reyes coordinated a final operation with the county prosecutor's office. Victor Marsh, whose full legal name turned out to be Gregory Allen Vance, was arrested outside the Green Line Business Suites office park on a Thursday morning, in possession of a laptop containing files on no fewer than 11 other targeted families across 3 states, some active, some already fully executed, the way mine very nearly had been. Denise Calloway was arrested the same day at her home, and Douglas Reyes, whose real involvement turned out to run deeper than a simple registered agent listing, he had, in fact, been the one to actually draft several of the fraudulent notarizations himself, using Calloway's stolen credentials, was picked up 2 days later trying to board a flight out of the regional airport. Dr. Neil Foster surrendered his medical license voluntarily rather than face the board hearing once the state attorney's office notified him of the new corroborating complaint, and he was separately charged with healthcare fraud and conspiracy to commit elder financial exploitation. Ethan and Priya were charged as well, conspiracy and forgery counts, reduced substantially through a plea agreement in exchange for their full cooperation and testimony, since it was their statements, and Priya's recorded meeting in particular, that had provided the backbone of the case against Vance, Calloway, Reyes, and Foster. Their sentences, when they came, were probation and community service rather than prison, a mercy I did not fight, and that Nora Bishop had quietly advocated for on my behalf with the prosecutor's office, because whatever they had done, I did not want my son and daughter-in-law to spend years in a cell for a crime that had been engineered, in no small part, by a man who had made lying his entire profession. Gregory Vance received 19 years. Denise Calloway received 11. Douglas Reyes received 14, with an additional federal wire fraud charge pending related to interstate transfers connected to victims in 2 other states. Dr. Neil Foster received 6 years and a permanent revocation of his medical license. The shop sale was voided entirely under a court order 6 weeks after the arrests, the equipment lien vacated as fraudulent, my retirement account frozen and fully restored, my house never touched at all, though I think about how close it came more often than I'd like to admit. Higgins Doyle went back up over the door of a shop that, thanks to Raymond insisting on flying up for the court proceedings and putting his own name back formally on the deed alongside mine so this never happens again to just one old fool alone, now belongs, on paper and in every way that matters, to both of us, the way it always should have. Ethan and I did not speak for almost 2 months after the arrests. I want to be honest about that, because I think a story like this owes you honesty more than it owes you a tidy bow. There were nights I sat in that quiet house and wondered if I would ever trust him again, and nights I wondered if trust was even the right word for what I was missing, or if what I actually missed was simpler and sadder than that, just my son, uncomplicated, the boy who used to fall asleep in the shop office on a pile of sawdust tarps while Margaret and I closed up for the night. He came to see me on a Sunday afternoon in October, 2 months after the arrests, and he didn't try to explain himself again. He just sat on the porch steps beside me and said, "Dad, I don't expect you to forgive this quickly, or maybe ever fully. I just want you to know I'm not going anywhere, and I'm going to spend as long as it takes trying to be the kind of son who deserves to be let back in." I didn't have an answer for him that day. I still don't have a complete one now. What I have is this: he comes by every Sunday. His rebuilding trust the slow way, the only way that actually holds, one ordinary unremarkable dinner at a time, and some weeks I feel closer to forgiving him fully, and some weeks the anger comes back sharp and sudden, usually late at night, usually when I catch myself looking at Margaret's chair at the table and thinking about how she would have known, the way she always seemed to know things about people before I did. I think if she'd lived, none of this would have happened, or if it had started, she'd have caught it faster than I did. I think about that more than I probably should. Raymond still calls me most Sundays now, same as he always did, except the calls are longer these days, and sometimes we don't even talk about the shop at all, just two old men who've known each other for 50 years, sitting on opposite ends of a phone line, glad, in a quiet unspoken way, that the other one is still there. If you've made it this far with me, thank you, genuinely. I know this one was long, and I know parts of it were hard to sit with. I'd love to hear from you before we close out. If a story like this has ever touched something in your own family, whether it went the way this one did or whether you're still somewhere in the middle of it right now, tell me in the comments. You don't have to share every detail. Sometimes just writing "this happened to my father too" is enough to feel less alone with it, and I promise you, reading those comments does the same thing for me. Here is what I want to leave you with, plainly, the way I've learned to say things since all of this happened. First, a power of attorney is not a blank check, and anyone who tells you otherwise, family or stranger, deserves your immediate suspicion, not your immediate trust. Read the actual language of any document you sign. Ask a lawyer, not a relative, what it covers. Do this before you're in crisis, not during one. Second, the phrase diminished capacity should never be used about you, by anyone, without your own doctor, someone you have chosen and trust, being the one to say it. If a stranger's letter uses that phrase about your own mind, that is not a medical assessment. That is a weapon, dressed up in a lawyer's vocabulary. Third, grief makes all of us vulnerable, and it makes the people who love us vulnerable too, in ways we don't always see until it's nearly too late. My son didn't set out to hurt me. He set out to protect me from a version of decline that a con man convinced him was inevitable, and in trying to get ahead of a danger that didn't exist, he walked us both into a much greater one that did. Fourth, document everything, always, the moment something feels wrong. I still don't fully know what would have happened if Mike Sorensen hadn't said that sentence on the ladder, if I hadn't happened to still have a key to a shop that wasn't legally mine anymore, if Raymond Doyle hadn't answered his phone at midnight. Luck played a larger role in catching this than I am entirely comfortable admitting. Don't rely on luck. Build your own paper trail before you ever need it. And fifth, the one I think matters most of all, do not let pride keep you from asking for help the moment something feels wrong. I very nearly didn't call Raymond that night. I told myself I could handle it quietly, alone, the way I'd handled most things in my life. If I had waited even 2 more weeks, my retirement account would have been drained, my life insurance beneficiary changed, and my own house would have become the next line item on Gregory Vance's spreadsheet. The people who did this to me were counting on exactly that kind of pride. Don't give it to them. There is one more part of this story I haven't told you yet, and I've gone back and forth about whether to include it, because it doesn't have the same shape as the rest: no ladder, no forged signature, no recording device hidden in a radio. It's quieter than that. But I think it matters more than almost anything else that happened. About 4 months after the arrests, Detective Reyes called me and asked if I'd be willing to meet with 2 of the other families Gregory Vance had targeted under his previous identities, the ones Sam Ostrowski had found traces of early on, the ones who'd never gotten far enough to see justice done. One was a woman named Loretta Fenn, 79, whose late husband's small auto parts business had been taken from her 3 years earlier through almost the identical mechanism, a distant nephew convinced by Vance, then still going by Gregory Vance's very first known alias, that his aunt was declining and needed protecting from her own decisions. Loretta had never recovered the business. The nephew had cut off contact entirely out of shame, and by the time anyone outside the family understood what had happened, the statute of limitations on several of the relevant charges had nearly run out. I met Loretta at a diner on the edge of town, the same kind of place Sam Ostrowski favored for these conversations, I noticed, all vinyl booths and bad coffee that somehow felt exactly right for the occasion. She was a small, sharp-eyed woman with a voice that still carried the trace of a Kentucky childhood, and she held my hand across the table for a long moment before either of us said anything at all. "You're the one who caught him," she said. It wasn't a question. "I had a lot of help," I said. "A contractor who said something he probably wasn't supposed to say. An old business partner who still answers his phone at midnight. A lawyer, a detective, a private investigator, and a son who eventually found his own way back to the truth, even if it took him longer than I would have liked." "I didn't have any of that," Loretta said quietly. "By the time I understood what had happened to me, the man was already 3 states away using a different name, and nobody believed an old woman crying about her husband's business over the phone. They believed my nephew instead. Everybody always believes the younger one first. I don't know why that is, but it's true." I sat with that for a long time after she said it, because I think she was right, and I think it's one of the ugliest, quietest truths at the center of everything Gregory Vance and Denise Calloway and Douglas Reyes and Dr. Neil Foster built their entire business around. People believe the younger, steadier voice over the older, frightened one, almost every single time, and men like Vance know that better than anyone, and they build their whole operation on the back of that one simple, terrible piece of human nature. "What can I do?" I asked her. "Tell me and I'll do it." "Talk about it," Loretta said. "Loud, and often, and to anyone who'll listen. That's the only thing that ever stops men like him. Not one court case. Not one arrest. Somebody talking loud enough, long enough, that the next old man on his list hears it in time. That conversation is, if I'm honest with you, a large part of why I'm sitting here telling you all of this now, in as much detail as I can bear to share." Loretta Fenn never got her husband's business back. She never got an arrest, or a courtroom, or a sentence read aloud by a judge. What she has is a folding chair in the back room of the Millhaven Senior Center every second Tuesday of the month, where 6 or 8 of us now sit together and talk about exactly this: moved paperwork, strange phone calls, a relative who suddenly seems very interested in what's in your will. Some of the people who come haven't been victimized yet. They come because a friend told them to, because something felt slightly wrong and they wanted somewhere to say it out loud before it became something worse. I think that room has probably done more good, quietly, in 6 months, than the entire 19-year sentence handed down to Gregory Vance ever will, though I'm glad for that sentence too, make no mistake. Both things can be true at once. Justice and prevention are not the same work, and we need people doing both. I'm 68 years old, and I go back to the shop most mornings now, same as I always did, and some days it feels almost the way it used to, and some days I still catch myself checking the lock twice before I leave, the way you do after you've learned the hard way that the ground under your feet isn't always as solid as it looks. Raymond and I are talking about taking on an apprentice next spring, somebody young, somebody who might carry this place forward the honest way, the slow way, one table and one chair at a time, the only way either of us ever knew how to build anything worth having. And every second Tuesday, I still show up to that folding chair in the senior center back room, because Loretta was right about one thing above everything else: the only real defense any of us have against men like Gregory Vance is each other, talking out loud, before it's too late for the person sitting quietly at the end of the row who hasn't found the courage yet to say what's actually wrong. If this story meant something to you, I'd ask you to do two small things. Share it with somebody in your life who might need to hear it: a parent, an adult child, anyone standing where I stood without yet knowing it. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing. These stories take real care to put together, and every comment, every share, every subscription tells me it's worth continuing to tell them. One last note: the way I always try to close these out honestly. This account reflects real and common patterns of elder financial exploitation that happen to families far more often than most people realize, but certain names, dialogue, and specific details have been shaped and adapted for the sake of telling the story clearly. If that kind of storytelling isn't for you, I understand completely, and I hope you find something else here that serves you better. For everyone else, thank you for sitting with me through this one. It means more than you know.